Hey everybody, this is Brian Sipitz from Advantage Strength and Conditioning. Today we're going to be talking about unilateral and multiplanar training and how important it is in any athletic development program. This is a topic I presented on at a clinic recently. So basically I distilled kind of a longer presentation down to the essential discussion, and I hope to share it with you in about 10 or 15 minutes here. So we're going to be talking about how important single leg training is in your program and how it should be your focus rather than big, heavy, two-legged lifts. So my job as a strength and conditioning coach, or your job as a performance enhancement coach or a sport coach, is to watch athletic movements, and you want to give your athletes better tools for competition. In order to give them better tools, you have to give them the right tools to begin with. So you got to ask yourself, what are these tools that you need for athletic competition? And when you watch athletic movements, there's a couple patterns that become clear. The first thing that becomes clear is that these athletic movements are made up of reciprocal motion. So the body uses the limbs in reciprocal motion to provide power and speed. So here in the hockey stride, we have one hip abducting and one hip adducting. So one's going out and one's coming in. In a linear sprint, one knee is driving forward, okay, the other foot is driving backwards to propel the body. Even in a rotational sport, say swinging a baseball bat, one hip is internally rotating, the other hip is externally rotating. So when you look at sports, you kind of realize that you're never really using your limbs or especially both legs in the same capacity at the same time. The other thing that becomes clear is that sports are played on one leg. You walk with one foot on the ground at a time. This running back is making a cut with one foot on the ground. Okay, so the importance of single leg strength can't be overstated, and unfortunately, I'm not sure that everybody's programming is reflecting that. So a lot of programs are based on a heavy back squat or clean snatch. Now, I'm not saying there's not a place for those things, but your training has to consist of more than just gaining strength through a squat. A couple of issues is, like we mentioned before, your body works in these reciprocal patterns. Your body's not actually used to pushing with two legs on the ground at the same time. And we'll talk a little bit about the bilateral deficit in a minute or two here, but your body actually isn't used to this, so it's not really an athletic pattern. Now, if you're looking to just gain strength to lift weights, if you want to be a weightlifter, go ahead and squat. That would be a great choice. But for athletic performance, we need to be training more on one leg. I did come up with one sport that's a bilateral, and there it is. And that's because basically your feet are strapped in. So it might make sense for rowers to do a standard bilateral squat, but that's about the only one I could come up with. All right, so we mentioned the squat is a great way to build strength. Okay, but is that all? Is that the most important thing? All right, so as a strength coach, if you think your job is to make people stronger, you can easily do that, but in a bilateral squat, you'll see the squat numbers go up. You'll see the legs get bigger, and life is good for a strength coach that views that as their job. But for me, my job as a strength coach is to give athletes better tools for performance on the field of play. And kind of what we find is Stuart McGill did a study where he took athletes with extremely high bench press numbers and matched them up against athletes that had very average bench press numbers in a task where they were standing and doing a standing cable press. So they're using one arm to press a cable forward in a standing position. And what he found was that there was absolutely zero correlation or zero predictability between those with the high bench press numbers and the average bench press numbers in the standing cable press task. Okay, so it didn't translate at all. That strength when they were lying on their back pressing up did not translate to the strength of them standing on their feet and pressing with one arm. And that's because we'll see there's a lot more involved in these pressing movements than just shoulder and chest strength. All right, so going back to the legs and hips, a squat's not going to get everything we need for a couple reasons. In a standard squat or in a bilateral squat, you're training the muscles of the legs. So you're training the quadriceps and hamstrings and glutes and spinal erectors and all that kind of stuff. So that's good. You're getting the flexors and extensors of the knee and hip. Okay, but then when you go to a single leg stance, things change quite a bit. You get all of a sudden the adductors turn on, glute medius turns on, quadratus lumborum turns on. So you get a lot more muscles that have to join the party in order to keep your body from rotating, to keep your body from flexing sideways, and to keep you, moving up and down. So these muscles that come on, they're called the lateral subsystem. They're going to keep you stable in what is essentially a three-dimensional movement. They're resisting rotation, resisting lateral flexion, and also keeping you upright. So they're keeping you from dropping to the ground. And so I mentioned this a little bit a few slides ago about the bilateral deficit. Again, your body's not wired to push with two limbs at the same time, especially in athletics. So this bilateral deficit is something we see, and just to use an example with easy math, if you have a 100-pound squat with the bar on your back, you're going to be able to do more when you add the sum of a single leg squat. When you add each leg, your max on each leg, you're going to come up with more than 100 pounds. So it might be maybe you can do a 60 or 65 pound single leg squat on each side. So that would give you 120 or 130 pound total there. So it's much more than what you could do with both legs at the same time. So that's a little bit puzzling for a lot of people, but I think what they've come up with is really kind of makes sense. And some of the neural explanations are that circuits that fire together wire together. And when you have things that you're doing all the time, you spend a lot of time on one leg. When you're walking, when you're running, your body is wired to work in those reciprocal patterns that we talked about. And when it's not working in reciprocal pattern, your body doesn't know quite what to do with it. Your body isn't wired that way. So your motor control is off just a little bit. So you're not going to be able to put up the same kind of weight as you can on a single leg. Also, there's a higher level of excitation in the area. So there's a lot more muscles doing work in a single leg squat or in a single leg stance than there are with 2 feet on the ground. All right, we talked about the anti-rotators have to work. You're resisting flexion. Okay, so there's all these other muscles that have to kick in and do a job to keep you facing forward and upright. We've also got this crossed extensor reflex, which is another illustration of how the body is wired. So if you step on a tack or a sharp rock or something like that as you're walking along, you're instinctively or you're reflexively going to pull that foot up to avoid the object, and at the same time your other foot is going to press down to the ground. So you immediately flex one side and extend the other, and that is, essentially if you flex both sides, you'd end up on the ground, probably on the object you were trying to avoid in the first place. But that's another illustration of how we're wired to work in these reciprocal patterns. So shouldn't we be doing that? Shouldn't we be spending time on one leg in the One of the biggest benefits of unilateral training is that it's also core training. So you may be doing a single leg squat, but you're also going to be training your core musculature to support your body in an athletic position. We find that single arm and single leg exercises load the body asymmetrically. Okay, so you may be standing on one foot, so the foot that's in the air, that hip is unsupported, and the muscles of that hip and the muscles of your core are forced to work to keep that hip up in the air and to keep it from dropping and losing efficiency in the movement. And that's that lateral subsystem that we touched on earlier. And this single leg training is also going to improve control of the hips and the low back. All right, so if you go into a cut, if you're running forward, if you're a basketball player and you go to cut to one side, as that foot plants, you want to be able to keep your other hip from dropping and getting really low and basically leaking power, because you want to be able to plant your foot and cut efficiently without losing control of your core and upper body. And also this single arm training especially is going to force us to link our upper body, link our ribs to our hips, to keep it strong, so we can keep good contact with the ground, and be good and strong from the top all the way down to the bottom. Unilateral training is also injury prevention. All right, so we get better control of knee valgus position. That's when the knees collapse in, and this is a really dangerous situation. It's been linked to, or I guess correlated with, high incidence of ACL injury, especially in females. So when you're training on one leg, you're training the hip rotators, and you're able to position that knee a little bit better, and keep yourself out of that knee valgus position, or keep your knee from collapsing in, which is a dangerous position. So we're preventing injuries, or hopefully reducing injuries in that way. Also, we talk about improved lumbopelvic stability. So your low back and your hips are going to be held in a better position, so you're at less risk for disc injury or some kind of shearing force or shearing injury on your low back. The other thing about training, say on a single leg, is that you're going to train both your dominant and your non-dominant side equally. Okay, so I think if you're a coach, I think we've all seen the athlete who is doing a bilateral squat and near the end is starting to fatigue, and instead of going straight down and straight up, they go straight down and then shift to their dominant side just a little bit, and then use that dominant leg to push themselves up. So what you get there is more work for the dominant leg and less work for the non-dominant leg, and so that strength gap starts to open up. Okay, so when you're training on a single leg, there is no other leg to help you. So it's basically you're training your dominant and non-dominant sides equally. And if you train that way, it might be a little bit easy for your dominant leg at first, and you're going to be working like crazy with your non-dominant leg, but you're closing that gap. You're getting closer and closer to having two sides that are equal, which is essentially what we want to look for when we're putting together a good strength training program. Also, just in practice, it's safer training. So in single leg work, you see a lot lighter loads. So there's not as much weight being moved or being put on the back, let's say, for a bilateral squat. So you have less shearing force, less compressive forces on the spine, and in big groups, it's a lot easier to deal with dumbbells and the occasional barbell than it is to have kids loading up barbells all the time. It takes quite a few sets of eyes to make sure that's a safe environment. So it's just safer training in practice. You're not moving quite as much. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit how we're going to begin to develop strength in a single leg with someone who is maybe used to a bilateral squat, and this is how we'll transition them into a single leg stance or single leg work. These are our triplanar squat variations. Okay, so we still have 2 feet on the ground, but we're starting to split the stance a little bit here now, and we're also going to start to work in 3 planes rather than just the sagittal plane that's covered by the squat. So the first one there is just a split squat. It's still a sagittal plane exercise, but the feet are split. The feet aren't going to step together. That would be a lunge. These are our squats. So you're just going straight down, straight up. The feet stay where they are. In the middle is a lateral lunge. So we're looking to drive one leg straight and bend the working leg to about 90 degrees. A lot of times groin flexibility will be a limiting factor here, and single leg strength will be a limiting factor. And the third one there is a rotational squat, so our feet are at 90 degrees. We're trying to sit back to the back heel there while still facing the front. And these are examples of how we're going to start to build that single leg strength. Now from here we can make things more difficult, or we can progress up as we go along here with a slide under the foot, or we can turn it into a lunge where we're actually stepping out and stepping back together. Okay, then it increases the velocity of the movement. So that's how we start to gain this single leg strength. And ultimately, we want to try to get to where we're strong on a single leg. We will ultimately have one leg on the ground, but just to get started, we're going to start with 2 feet on the ground, static and supported. Alright, so we've talked a little bit about strength, but now let's talk about power. So how do we generate the most power? Those people that want to jump the highest are taking off of one leg. Alright, so you don't see high jumpers go up, plant with 2 feet, and push that way. They're driving one knee up, and they're pushing with another, so we get more of that. At Advantage, we always try to progress to single leg plyometrics and single leg Olympic lifting variations. So we're trying to get our athletes to produce power with one leg, just as they would if they were going to jump or cut or rotate into a swing. Okay, so we want them to be really powerful on one. So to get into this single leg power, after we've gone through a progression of getting them strong, getting a good foundation of strength, then we're going to start into some of these different variations, single leg lifting variations. Again, these used to be videos, so it's a little tough to tell on the pictures, but on the left hand side there, okay, that's a Haydn jump, so we've actually rotated into that. It's a rotational Haydn. So we've rotated into that to face the camera, and then we're going to explode sideways in the frontal plane. So we're working not only on transverse power and the rotation to begin with, but also in the frontal plane we're going to work from left to right to explode out, and that really does a nice job mimicking a hockey stride. On the right side, that is our rear foot elevated dumbbell snatch. So this works really nicely if you have a kid who's maxing out your dumbbells. This can actually take probably another 30-40 pounds off of what their max is. By elevating the rear foot, we start to really focus on that front leg and developing power with that front leg. Alright, so those are both, or I guess the snatch was a sagittal plane work, and we kind of have to ask ourselves, does all this time spent in the sagittal plane, does that transfer to other planes? Most sports aren't played in the sagittal plane. In fact, sports are played in all 3 planes at the same time. So we need to find a way to transfer that power that we've generated in the sagittal plane, and we need to find a way to transfer that into the transverse plane or the rotational plane, because that's how most sports are played. All right, so we see there's this line of tissue and muscle and connective tissue called the spiral line, and this is made famous by Thomas Myers in Anatomy Trains. This spiral line cuts across the body and sort of wraps it from one hip to the opposite shoulder, and you can see it pretty clearly in this picture. This guy's pushing on one side and pulling on the other side of the stick. Again, we get the reciprocal motion, and so the body is made to do that. We have this sling across the front of your body that we're intending. So to train this sling, we want to train rotational power. We want to work to not only be able to rotate effectively, but also to resist rotation effectively. All right, so on the left side, we are standing on one leg, and the ball is placed on the opposite shoulder. We're just going to push it forward. All right, and this is a pretty effective anti-rotation throw. So as we push the ball, it's going to try to push our shoulder back, and we have to resist that rotation and stay strong into the ball in order to get maximum velocity. And our base of support is across the body, so we're training that spiral line because the opposite leg is on the ground. Now on the right side here, we're actually going to be rotating the hips. So we start basically facing the camera. We're going to take a big step, And this is our med ball punch. So we're going to take a big step and punch the ball into the wall. We use a D ball here, one that's not going to bounce, so nobody's afraid to get hit when the ball bounces back. But we want to be keeping the elbow up behind the ball and punching the ball into the wall as hard as possible here. So we train the different linkages from the ankle all the way up to the release of the ball. So we learn how to develop power really effectively here. And this is how we take the horsepower that we generate with sagittal plane lifts, so like a clean or a snatch, and this is how we take that power and direct it into a little bit more athletic setting. So these have been really, really useful for us. So take-home points. Standard barbell lifts are unquestionably a great choice to produce strength gains, but you're definitely missing a piece of the athletic development puzzle there, because it's a single it's a movement in a single plane, and you're using two legs at once, which doesn't always happen in athletics. Unilateral and multiplanar exercises improve both the body's hardware and software function and enhance sport performance. So not only when you're training this way are you improving the quality of the muscle itself, but you're also improving the software. So you're improving your motor control, or your brain's control of your body, and you're making it a little bit more relevant to your sport by training on one leg or with one arm, and using your core musculature to stabilize everything else. And last, don't ditch the bar completely. There's definitely a place and time for heavy squat, or a hang clean, or a bar snatch, or whatever you like to do with it. But your program should definitely include mostly three-dimensional unilateral exercises when appropriate, and we're definitely going to use a progression to get there. So there's a time for the bar, but it should be for strength development only, and not necessarily for athletic development. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. Look for more to come in the future. I'm going to do this with all the presentations that I've done. Again, if you have questions, you can email me at bsipotz, B-S-I-P-O-T-Z, at advantagestrength.com. I look forward to hearing from you for some feedback, or if you have some questions, I'd be happy to go over them with you. Anyway, thanks again for listening. And don't forget, coming up this June, we have the Advantage Speed School. So we're going to be working on speed mechanics and acceleration and change of direction, and things that are really important for sport performance. So come check us out and join us for that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care, and talk to you next time.